Thank you so much for joining today. We have a really incredible session coming up on engaging traditional and religious leaders as champions of gender equality, a stepping stone to SRHR. And my name is Jenny. I'm with the Global Secretariat. If you would like to share any comms and any thoughts or reflections from the contributions of our speakers today in the session, uh, please do feel free to use the hashtag, no, Ubuntu Symposium, Symposio Ubuntu for Spanish. We will be doing the same from our end. We're really excited to pass on the session note to our session presenters and organizers for an incredibly important discussion. And so I pass it over to Lloyd. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, colleagues. Thanks very much, Jennifer, for this wonderful opportunity. I would like to welcome everyone who have joined us this afternoon. I know it's been a long day. It's towards the end of the day for some of countries. Today we're here to discuss the issues of sexual and reproductive health rights, and I'm not alone. I'm with my colleague Lloyd, who's from SAfAIDS. I think he will take some time to introduce himself. But I think the main purpose is to engage the traditional and faith leaders to find ways in terms of how best we can create safer space for both men and women to access health facilities freely. But at the same time, it should not be just a burden on women and girls only, but what role that men can play and boys as well to support and also to access those services. But at the same time, this will be an opportunity to engage the faith and traditional leaders to find ways how can they create space for their members, for their followers to engage on these matters and also encourage them to access these facilities. And I think the biggest problem that we are facing globally, it's the killing of women and girls. Now, those are the issues again that we need to also to talk about. And one of the issues that will be our approach for today, we'll approach these matters from point of view of toxic masculinities that will lead us in terms of finding ways in dealing with this. So I will invite my colleague Lloyd to join us and introduce himself. Lloyd.
Thank you, Vusi. How are you doing, everybody? How are you? Greeting from Zimbabwe. My name is Lloyd Dembure. I'm the Senior Programs Officer with SAfAIDS. So today I'll be supporting Vusi on the session around using our traditional leaders and religious leaders as champions of change, which is a stepping stone to, towards sexual and reproductive health and rights. So our conversation will be in two parts. Vusi will lead the first part of the session, then I will come in for the second part of the session. Thank you. Over to you, Vusi.
Thanks very much, Lloyd. I think today it's not only about just the presentations, but it's also interacting with our audience, you know, from wherever you are, because I think these issues that we are coming up with are not just issues that we are educating or training, but it's all about engaging and collectively to find solutions. So I have quite a number of, before I present, I have quite a number of questions that I'll be sharing for discussions, and I would like to interact, you know, share your thinking, share in terms of what is the way forward. And the most exciting part is when we'll be finding action steps that we need to take, because I think it's not just about talking, but at the end of this session, we'll try to find the steps that we need to take, because it's very important that we also come up with action steps in finding solutions, and how are we going to hold each other accountable. And I'm hoping that in this house will be joined by more faith leaders and traditional leaders who will also share their experience, share their ideas, because we are not here to bash on traditional and faith leaders, but we are saying how best we can work together, because these problems, it's our problems. It's not for a certain group. It's not a continental problem, but it's a global problem, and everyone is affected. So allow me, colleagues, just to talk with you, and feel free. I know maybe at some point you might be struggling to talk. You are more than welcome to write on the chat box. My colleague Lloyd will help me in terms of looking at the chat box. If you find that you're struggling with your mic, or maybe you have a problem with the connection, you're more than welcome to write on the chat box your comments, your questions, so that we have a very, very fruitful conversation. So I welcome you once more. For those who just joined us, my name is Vusi Cebekhulu. I'm from Sonke Gender Justice. I'm based in Johannesburg. I'm a social structural drivers regional coordinator. So you're welcome. I think moving forward, Lloyd, it's very important that we also look at the issues of toxic masculinities. What is our understanding wherever you are right now, when you think about toxic masculinities? What is your understanding? What's your personal understanding about toxic masculinities? Let's talk about this, because most of the time you find people talking about toxic masculinities, and I want us maybe to unpack this in this room, so that by the time we go out to our communities, we have a clear understanding of what is toxic masculinities. What is your own understanding in a very simple way? Unmute, Deliwe, you can't hear me.
Yeah. Hello. Sorry about that. I was battling. I don't know what's going on. Thank you for this chance, and thank you for inviting me to this session. Hi to everyone who has joined. I'm Deliwe. I'm from Sonke Gender Justice. I work with Vusi, and maybe my just short response to the question, toxic masculinity. For example, the belief that men are more superior than women, that there are other spaces like that women cannot be found in or expected to be in. For instance, now that you're talking about religious and traditional leaders, they believe that women cannot be pastors, for instance. I can give that example. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Deliwe. Thanks for your contribution. Any thoughts that you'd like to share? Remember that this is not from the book. You're thinking, want to engage with you, want to hear more from you. Maybe from your own countries, you might share something different from Deliwe. You're more than welcome. And with that, please, yes.
Yeah, sorry, I was not allowed to speak. I think I was not given.
First of all, I'm looking for you very short video that explains what we do as a network.
Come again, I missed that. Hello, Willard, can you please repeat yourself? You are on mute again.
All right, it is the host who is getting me. So the host was not allowed to speak. Okay, what I was saying is the toxic masculinity to me is about the attitude that the male sex is dominant and supreme, I think, to other sexes. And then once the male speaks, then it is taken as the final and conclusive. And in most cases, it dominates even in platforms where decisions are supposed to be made, and then because this is a particular male, and when they speak, it's always taken as a rule now to use. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Willard. That's powerful. Thanks very much. Any thoughts? What is your thinking about toxic masculinity? Maybe you may bring up different examples that you have, that you'd like to share with us, so that we learn from this, about these toxic masculinities. Because maybe from where I come from, it's different from your country. The attitude is different. Because at the same time, I want us to also to come up with what influenced these toxic masculinities, what influenced this toxic masculinity. But before, let's just share in terms of what is your thinking, what is your knowledge, what is your understanding about masculinities, toxic masculinities. For those who just joined us, it's Vusi Cebekhulu from Sonke Gender Justice. I'm with Lloyd from SAfAIDS. So you're more than welcome. Our question right now is we're just actually just discussing, you know, toxic masculinities. What is your own understanding about toxic masculinities? If you talk about toxic masculinities, what examples that you may actually bring so that if someone on the ground may understand, because some people, they don't understand this big English word, you know. So it's to simplify it. What do you mean by toxic masculinities? And there was an example that was brought by Dembure that if you go to in the holy places or in the churches, you find that in some churches they don't allow a woman to be a leader. You know, yes. Let me welcome Person Osaya, my brother. You're welcome. Talk to me, Person.
Thanks so much, my brother Vusi. It's an interesting one here. My understanding, just to make it a bit simple, toxic masculinity, those belief system and practices that appear to support and that do support a patriarchy, and that is also harmful, not just to the female, but also to the male themselves. For instance, when a man believes that it is his right to provide, he puts unnecessary pressure on himself, and that's toxic. So that's an example of toxic masculinity. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Person from Nigeria. Thanks very much, my brother, for your contribution. I see a comment from Akdojan. I'm sorry for pronouncing this very wrongly. From Belgium. Chat box. He's saying it can be the form of violence raised by fathers or husbands in the name of protection of their wives and daughters within the household, and the way of raise their sons to support the system. Wow, that's very profound. But based on these examples that you just brought in this house, I might ask actually, what influenced these toxic masculinities? Where it comes from? Where it comes from? What influenced these toxic masculinities? Were we born with this? Or it's something that we've just got it somewhere, you know, where when we walk down the streets, or we learn from the school. So where it comes from, so that we can actually be able to deal with this problem. Where it comes from your own understanding, where it comes from. Chola.
Yes, thank you. So just to say that I agree with all the suggestions and the ideas that have been put forward. As one of the speakers mentioned earlier, in terms of propping up patriarchy and sustaining it. And this is something, toxic masculinity, I guess it's parallel in women's internalized misogyny, because there are many things that women do to perpetuate this as well. And these come down to societal norms. These can come from particular interpretations of sacred texts, decontextualized readings of sacred texts, but there are other sources, you know, because there are parts of the world that don't have history of Christianity, Islam, and these things still, like in Japan, for instance, and these things still reproduce in a very harmful way. I also wanted to give us another example, because we talk about violence, and violence comes in different forms. So you obviously have physical violence, but then I think something like a system like polygamy is very much an example, a symptom of these toxic masculinity or a patriarchal system that really serves little for the woman. And I think that's something that you see in wider society, in every culture, where there's a certain level where, because male approval and maleness is valued more highly, there's a way that women are undermined and devalued, even in relationships and things like that. And so there's this idea that, you know, that there's certain power dynamics within relationships. And I'm not saying every man does this, but this is something in a way that every man is complicit in a way, especially if they don't speak up. But there are ways, the kind of manipulation that goes on. And because of certain biological realities, such as women can only have children for a certain amount of time, there's a way that men can exploit that. And if they feel that a woman is desperate enough to put up a certain behavior. So I think we often think of the grand things, and we really should do. but at the same time, they're like tributaries that, you know, they're streams of less dramatic toxicity, but they all contribute to these harmful gender norms. So I think we have to also think about these everyday interactions as well.
Thanks very much, Tola. You've said it mouthfully. I wish we could have more time, you know, so that we go deeper on these issues, you know. Thanks for sharing. And from the chat box, I see Paul is saying a lot of these toxic masculinities comes from the way we are socialized. And Sister Lewa is sharing sentiment with Paul that our socialism within families, the way we bring up boys to think they are superior compared to girls, from simple things such as a house chores reserved along gender lines. Yeah, that's true. That's true. So that's where this toxic masculinity comes from. That means they come from home. And most of the time when I speak about these toxic masculinities, I say there's no man who was born being violent, but these are the learned things, you know, we learn from wherever we're at home, in our communities, and even the messages that we receive as a young boy. And yesterday I was discussing with some of my colleagues that even before that boy has been born, you know, you find that the colors, the toys that are being bought for him, you know, it tells that this is how we expect you to conduct yourselves in communities. So automatically, when that boy grows, he thinks that he's superior compared to the girl. So, but at the same time, I would like to I'm not sure, Chola, are you is your hand still up, or maybe it's the old hand? Chola, is your hand still up, or maybe or you have more points to say? Okay, thanks. Okay. I want us colleagues to also look at how does this toxic masculinities affect women's health? How does this toxic masculinities affect women's health? I think along the line it will affect women, but I would like to hear from you. How does it affect women's health? How does it affect women's health? Health in terms of when you speak of issues of accessing services, health at the health facilities, going for seeking help at the clinics, going for the termination of pregnancy, family planning. How does it affect women as well? Paul, you've raised your hand. I would like to hear from you.
Oh, okay, thanks so much, Vusi. In practice, what we see every day, some of our colleagues have mentioned this, the way the boy child is raised, he is told his place is never in the kitchen. So it's not to do chores, that's the girl's job. So he grows up and then he's married to a woman. Because of the pressure from the society, both men and women are now working. So just as he's coming from the office, the woman is coming from the office, the man expects that it is still the woman who must go to the kitchen, who must take care of the chores, who must wash, and who must. So you wear the woman out practically. She breaks down, you know. So, and because a lot of the pressure is put on her, both physically and emotionally too. The woman is raised, hey, when the man is talking, you don't reply. That's how to keep peace. The question is, why is the responsibility of keeping peace at home on the woman only? So this the way we are socialized, and this in practice you begin to put so much weight on one of the genders, and then you break them down.
Thanks very much, Paul, for your contribution. It tells you that it comes very deep, you know, and I wish some of us here as parents maybe also learn in terms of how do we pass the messages to our daughters and sons, how do we conduct ourselves before our children, so that they learn from us as much as we can. I would like to hear from others as well. How does this affect women's health, or how does it affect women's sexual reproductive health? Because I think women right here, they're on the receiving end, you know. So maybe helping someone who's sitting there thinking that Anyway, how does this actually make women to be so crazy, making noise against us, because this is our own problems? So maybe we can actually share to say, as much as it's our problems as men, if we think so, but at the same time, how it affects women now, because at the end of the day, women are on the receiving end. So how it affects them when you speak of sexual reproductive health. I see a comment from Chola. Okay, let me just go back. From Uzoma. Uzoma is saying toxic masculinity comes from cultural pressure also. Society expects men to behave in a certain way. Men will lose someone and he's expected not to cry because crying is associated with women. Yeah. And they say tigers don't cry. I'm happy that I'm not a tiger. Chola is saying at Uzoma, this is very much an issue. It stretches to other issues and internalizing pressure rather than speaking about their weaknesses. Vulnerability is not viewed as a strength. You see this reflected in the male suicide rates across the world. Men are also said to be less likely to report serious physical ailments as well. Wow. Actually, with your comment, Chola, I would like to hear as well how it affects men, because now you've raised issues as well of men, because they're not supposed to cry, express their feelings, and of which I think it also actually they're also discouraged to go and seek help at the health facilities, because if they go there, they will be portrayed as weaker or sissy. You know? So maybe if you can also think about how it affects men. I will tell you why I'm asking this question in terms of how it affects men, because most of the time we want to engage men, but we don't actually also raise some points in terms of how it affects them as well, because most of the time men, they think that whatever that they do, they're doing if the women's favor, you know, they're doing for women, for them, they're doing favor for women. They think that whatever that they do is about women. They don't think about themselves. So I want us also to help these men to say, Vusi, as a man, if you also live with these toxic masculinities, you will suffer from this. So that when I leave this room with information that also you need to be careful of this, because it will affect your life. So let's also share in terms of how it affects men as well, especially on the sexual reproductive health. I'd like to see more hands. And the chat box is there. If you can't speak on the mic, you can also type as well. I see again from Chola, it says adverse effects on women health, harmful practices such as FGM, an example. Great. Okay, colleagues, I have just a few slides that I've prepared. These slides will actually help us, because I want to also to help our faith and traditional leaders. Like I've said earlier on, that it's not about us coming hard on faith leaders and traditional leaders. And this is not to rubbish culture, faith, and so forth, but to say, how do you go back and reflect and talk about these issues? Because these issues affect our lives. Churches, palace, it affects our lives. And even the very same traditional leaders, they're not from different planets. They're from the very society. So they also actually are being affected by these issues. So this slide will actually take us through. I will take this comment from Belgium at Akwajan. Especially on mental health, many men are unable to admit if they don't want to, their depression are curable, and for reproductive health, not having a child or birth control are still a taboo. Wow, that's powerful. That's powerful. And this is an example that I was sharing that some other time with my colleagues, that if you look at in our communities, most men actually they suffer from depression. They end up being mentally disturbed. But unfortunately, the blame goes to a woman to say she's the one who bewitched her. So let me just quickly take you this few slides presentation that will summarize whatever that you've discussed today. And I can tell you that it's not different from what we've said, but it's just an additional. This session will cover messages that influences toxic masculinities. It will also speaks to toxic masculinities and results. What are the results in terms of that comes from the toxic masculinities? What is the role of both traditional and faith leaders that they can play in promoting sexual reproductive health rights? And conclusion. So I think we spoke earlier on about how what are the messages that comes from these toxic masculinities. The message that normally are shared in our communities says, be strong, be tough as a man, be rough or aggressive, don't show any caring, don't show emotions, and they says tigers don't cry. A man is allowed to have multiple sexual partners. Don't fear. For example, if a boy says, I'm scared to walk at night, that boy is regarded as very, very weak person. And always there's this element that be an African man, whatever wrong that you do, they will say, be an African man, act like an African man. But at the same time, as a man, you are encouraged to be stubborn, not to listen to women. Now, what are the results out of all these messages? In terms of health, global women life expectancy is 5 to 8 years higher than men. Men's lower health-seeking behavior, risk-taking, risk of work, because we don't actually go and seek for help. The only time we get to the clinics or to the doctor or hospital is when things are very, very bad. And when you speak about violence against women and girls, it's a global pandemic that affects 1 in 3 women in lifetime. Now it clearly tells that this toxic masculinity actually also contributes to the violence that we see against women and girls. But again, when you speak about the violence in conflict, violence in general in our communities, men represent 90% of the world's prison population, more than 90% of deaths in conflict and homicide. And you can see actually that when a man grows with these toxic masculinities, that doesn't just end there being controlled, but it also goes to an extent where he also commits violence, be aggressive, and that form of violence, it's the violence against women, violence against children, violence against same men. And those men again suffers from suicide, mental health. Many are having higher alcohol, tobacco, and drugs use, higher rates of suicide globally. And again, when it comes back to women, whom I said earlier on, they are on the receiving end. Every 1,000 life deaths, about 5 women died during pregnancy within 2 months after childbirth. So these are the numbers that actually we got from Department of Health in South Africa. But I think these numbers, as much as it's from South Africa, but if you go actually, especially in our continent, you might find that women are suffering from this because they don't have a control in terms of taking for birth control, family planning, because they are discouraged to say, as a man, as a woman, you cannot do that, but my permission as a husband. So every time, whenever she wants to do that, she has to go for the seek approval from the partner or from the husband. Now let's look at, because I think the purpose is to engage our faith leaders and traditional leaders. I think the first point is very, very, very important, that whenever we work with our traditional leaders, we don't actually bring them as gatekeepers only, but we also want them to be the players of this game. We want them to participate. We want them to be the champions. We want them to come in the space and say, yes, as leaders, we are very much aware about this, and we really condone the violence, and we really promote the equality. Because previously, leaders have been initially portrayed as just gatekeepers. We knock at their door and they give permission to access their communities, but they're not playing the game. So as well, leaders are educators, and they can hold accountable, each other. So it's very important that we work with them, and the accountability would never come from us, but amongst themselves. Once we work with them and they are much exposed on these issues and understand these issues, they will be able to hold each other accountable. And we know for the fact that in every traditional spaces, faith spaces, is predominated by men. So we really need them to be there so that they can engage each other. But at the same time, they have a power to talk to other men and boys out in the communities. Because sometimes it's very difficult for us as an ordinary men and women to go and engage people. But if they are faith leaders and traditional leaders, they will actually be able to make a sense to them. But also to encourage other men and women to take action, building a movement, demand justice, claims rights, that aiming to change the world. So you can see the role that the leaders can play. It's not just talking, but they also actually take action as well. Now, our conclusion on this: culture and religions play huge roles in shaping our attitudes and lifestyles. Hence, there's a need to work with them. And we are pleading to our faith leaders, to our traditional leaders, to come on board, because really these issues, they are beyond our control, because they have a say, they have a power, they have influence, So that's why we really need to work with them. Women have elevated mortality rates from pregnancy. So that means it means that leaders, they also need to talk about this, because they need to treat this with the agents. It's very, very important. It's not something that they just need to teach, but they need to say, let's talk about this, because our daughters, our partners are dying. So let's talk about this. But at the same time, sexual reproductive health is the right for all. So that's very, very important. Our faith leaders, they need to consider that. But to speak about sexual rights for all, it's not just for certain people, but for all of us in the community, is our right. Thank you. Those are the few slides. And whenever you want to more information, to keep on engaging, you can go to our website, Men Engage Africa. That's where you can be able, and you can even go to our Men Engage Global. It's also actually a good platform to share and to discuss these issues, because this is an ongoing discussion. It's not just a once-off thing. Thank you very much. I will just maybe take few hands or questions, if there are any questions or comments, before I hand over to Lloyd.
Okay, so I was actually just thinking, one very important factor, especially when you look at faith leaders and traditional leaders, we tend to, of course, they are leaders of the communities, they are gatekeepers, but also we need to be able to make them understand the issues that go on with regards issues of toxic masculinity from a point of view of their own personal experiences. Because most of the time we tend to have a situation where when we go to them, we just approach them from there for them to be the people to go to when they go into the community and mobilize the community. But they also need to go through a process where they do a personal reflection and see how their personal experiences affect the decisions they make even within the community. Because sometimes in certain societies, you find the traditional leaders and the religious leaders are the ones who will sit in to probably advise the men, the boys, the women, and the girls. But it's very important for us to be able to let them understand, to say, you know what, at the end of the day, we need everyone to be on board when it comes to trying to ensure that everybody enjoys a peaceful experience of life. So they need also to be given a chance to say, okay, what is it really are we talking about? How do you look at it from your personal experiences? What role are you playing as an individual to ensure that toxic masculinity doesn't take place, to ensure that even just from the household point of view, as an individual, how is that going on within your household? What are you doing that is probably maybe reinforcing those different cultural values that might not be so very good for society at large? Thank you.
Thanks very much, Stephen. That is true. That is true. That's why we say let's not bring them as just gatekeepers, but let's allow them to be the players of this game, so that they can share their personal experience. But I think Lloyd will also share some of the experience, because he's also working with traditional and faith leaders. Tola, I saw your hand.
Yeah, yes. I just wanted to lower it and didn't accidentally keep it up like last time. Sorry that I've been talking so much, but I was just thinking something that's often crossed my mind. I can only speak from maybe the Christian perspective, because that's the tradition and faith background from which I come. But I think often when I see these things reinforced and such for a ferocity in which people hold on to the idea of men being, gender roles and men being leaders and women having to submit to men. I think a lot that has to do with people not understanding their value and being made in the image of God. I think that's something that is it's an entry point for those who claim to have faith. At least I'm talking from the Judeo-Christian tradition. I can't speak for Islam or other world faiths or world religions, but I think there needs to be, and this is amongst the leaders themselves, because I think there's a lot of insecurity behind a lot of, I think if people, there's almost this idea that someone else has to be, for you to feel good about yourself, someone else it has to be the expense of someone else. It's this zero-sum, lose-lose game. And I think it's important, particularly from, as I said, from the church perspective. And unfortunately, I don't think there are enough people who think like this, but we try and we work for what we have to encourage people to put their value in their, the fact that they are loved and made in the image of God, loved by and made in the image of God. And so there's no need to draw your value from masculinity or restricted ideas of what masculinity is. And I guess the same for women to an extent as well. Because the other side of that is, for instance, women in some churches, in some denominations, there's real emphasis on women being wives and mothers, and as if there's nothing else, which begs the question, apart from many other things, what happens to those who aren't, wives and mothers, or might not be called to be wives and mothers? So I think it's really important that this is an entry point. I think from a theological perspective, that will be helpful, and it's not going to be overnight. But I honestly think there's a lot of underlying insecurity about where people get their value from. And if your value is from being masculine, and masculine is presented this way, then you're going to devalue the other, as in women. You're not going to see them as equal to you, but also it's almost to say that they have to be subjugated so you can feel better, which is often a sign of insecurity anyway. And that works in the context of class. That works in many other contexts. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Tola. Thanks for your contribution. Let me just go to some comments from the chat box. From Paul, the talk about my body is my own is a reaction to the patriarchal practice where the man believes the woman must produce the babies when and how the man wants it. This affects the woman's health because she bears the weight of childbearing, but is not allowed to have a say. This is wrong and currently being challenged. That's true, Paul. And it's something that men, we normally think that when she's pregnant, that's an easy thing. She will go through that and that's it. But we don't actually think about some of the consequences, the results that she's going through, the feelings. We don't consider that. And she has a say. From Beham Abdogen, question: these leaders are part of the same system who are mostly made benefits from the system. Thus, they do not want to lose their place in power. So how it is possible to persuade the oppressor to give up on their power? This is a good question. But my take in most of the time, it's you cannot push the person that you want him or her to work with you. So in this case, there are quite few, or I would say there are actually some leaders out there who are actually willing to bring change. And now it's a question of, let's work with those who are willing so that they can actually go and persuade those who are still reluctant. And it's true, it's not easy to surrender the power, but at the same time, it's possible if we work together and use those who are willing to share this piece of cake. And I can tell you, in different workshops, different trainings, different conferences, you find some leaders who are willing to make change. But unfortunately, because now if we approach them and say that the oppressors, let's push them away, then that means we'll be left alone and there's nothing that will achieve. But I think Lloyd later on will be able to tell us more about his experience in working with the faith and traditional leaders, especially the work that he's doing in Zimbabwe. A few comments. I think Tola is also agree with Beham to say it's like she's saying it's like a capitalism, patriarchy goes hand in hand, and it goes hand in hand. And Stephen is saying very true, Tola. there is also a great need for value clarification. And if I'm saying, let's find the idealist then. It's also important to emphasize the disadvantage of the system, including the barren societal pressure men bear unnecessarily. Right now, I will just bring an example. In the recent death of the Zulu king, the person who is holding the power currently is a woman. So I think slowly we are getting there, but like the change is a process. So we need just to work with this with those who are willing to make a change, and also to make sure that we don't actually just nurse their feelings, but to say, hang on, we think here we need to hold you accountable. But as long as we put them away, it's going to be them and us, and we'll never find a common, we'll never actually achieve our goals. Our goal is about lives of women and children out there. So it's very important to engage them. Let us not despair, but it's very important to engage them. So I will hand over to my colleague Lloyd to come and share his experience in doing this work with the traditional and faith leaders. Thank you very much, colleagues. Lloyd?
Thank you very much, Vusi. I'll build on from what you have said. So I'll begin by also asking but I want to make this more participatory as possible. So I will begin by asking our participants to share their experiences on why do we need to work with the traditional and also the faith leaders. And you can also share your experience on how you have managed to engage these leaders as champions for gender justice. So you can either raise your hand or you can type in on the chat box. Then I will then be able to share a slide that I have prepared on how we have been working with our traditional leaders as champions based from our experience in Zimbabwe. For those who joined later, my name is Lloyd Dembure. I'm from SAfAIDS, based in Zimbabwe. So we can kick off the conversation. You can share your experience on engaging our traditional leaders and also faith leaders, and why is it important to engage these gatekeepers, and what is some of your experience engaging with this group?
I think we're still digesting the question. Yeah, but I think from my contribution, Lloyd, on your question, it's simply to say the traditional leaders and the faith leaders. I think, like earlier on, someone said they oppressors, sort of like, you know. But I think we know that they've been actually defending some of the culture that is been actually interpreted as something that is very oppressive to women. Now, I believe that working with them, it will also give them, actually, it's all about sensitizing them to understand how painful it is for a woman to be oppressed, but at the same time, for them to understand that as much as women are oppressed, but it's also a burden to them as men as well.
Thank you, Vusi, for that contribution, sharing your experience. Any other experience?
There is a hand from Paul and Stephen.
Okay, Stephen, you can go on. Thanks.
Thank you, Lloyd. Well, sharing from our experience here in Zambia, I'm coming from an organization called the Zambia Men's Network, and fortunate enough, Lloyd, I'm happy to say we do a number of activities alongside SAfAIDS in Zambia, and one of the experiences that we've had working with traditional leaders is that they are the first people that we went to approach, especially for give a quick example of an activity that we have been working with to try and get to work around issues to do with masculinity and issues to do with prevention of violence against women, issues to do with sexual reproductive health and rights. We try to work through the process of building the knowledge and understanding of issues to do with comprehensive sexuality education. So before we could go out into the communities, we first targeted the traditional leaders and the religious leaders because they are the gatekeepers within the communities. And before you can even go and talk about things in their community, they need to be aware and to be made to understand what exactly are we talking about when we talk about violence against women? What exactly are we talking about when we talk about women's reproductive health rights? What are we talking about when we talk about caregiving roles that both men and women should be able to do? And from arising from that particular experience, the traditional leaders get to understand and become gatekeepers and champions as we roll out most of the activities that we do to try and reach out to the young people, the young men, the young women, the boys and the girls. So it's really been a situation where we take them through the process, where they look at issues from a personal perspective. And then as they get to experience and see what roles they've been playing and how unfair some of these practices are within the community, then they get to have a buy-in to whatever, to understand. So, okay, they need to clarify on certain aspects, certain value systems or certain belief systems that might not necessarily be working to the advantage of us as a people, but probably working against a better lifestyle for different individuals. And I think probably in a nutshell, that's the best experience that I probably would be able to share from our experience in Zambia.
Thank you very much, Stephen, for sharing your experience on how you have been engaging with the traditional leaders. Yes, using them as an entry point to reach your communities. We know usually if you don't get the buy-in from these leaders, it's very difficult to convince the communities which highly regard them as the champions, be it of culture and also of faith. So it's very important to engage with these community leaders, as you rightly pointed out there. I've seen someone who raised the Peso. You were raising your hand. Sorry if that's your pronunciation.
Okay. Yes, you're right. Thanks for letting me in. The question is a very important one. Not just that the religious leaders and the traditional leaders are the gatekeepers. The level of influence they have over the people is so much and so high that we can't take it for granted. For example, there's a denomination in Nigeria. They have a branch all over the world. The pastor, the head man, has a coiled hair. And because of that, if you come to Lagos, for example, you have thousands of young men with their hair coiled, just to pattern themselves after the leader. So that's to tell you that the level of influence the religious leaders and the traditional leaders have over the people is so much that we can make use of. You can imagine if that particular religious leader comes forward, for instance, to say that what is good for a particular gender is good for all the gender identities within the same community. It tells you too that all the followers, just the same way they coil their hair, we also listen to their leader and do likewise. So it's important that we engage them. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing your experience. Anyone else to chip in? You can text on the chat box.
Lloyd, let me help you. There are comments in the chat box. It's from Chola. At Stephen and other male allies, comrades, have you observed significant generational difference in attitudes, willingness to engage? That's a question.
Probably from our experience, I'd actually say that there's actually a very significant difference noticed, because I think also some of the contributing factors are generally the fact that based on the different expectations of individuals, based upon their age and what society is expecting of them and the roles that they are playing in their individual lives. For the young people, the younger generation, you find it's easy to bring them on board, and also, of course, taking into account that there's different methodologies that we go about doing that. You either present them with an opportunity to do other activities which are very appealing, and then you take them through the process. But then, of course, there's also the aspect of working with, for example, when you're looking at the generation of people that maybe, for example, above the age of 40. There's where we try and see how do we get their fellow peers to create an environment like a safe space where they're able to come on board and have somebody that makes them understand from the same level, from the same point of view. You find mostly for adults who've been there for a very long time, it's a bit tricky. In our Zambian society, they say there's a saying that says in Chumbumsolora Toloka, which means like sweet potato that has already grown cannot be straightened if it's bent. So there's some deeply entrenched values that, mostly people that have grown and they've gone through life, and they perceive that to be the actual way that life should go. But then along the way, when they get to see fellow peers coming on board, helping them to make them understand, they see other people who are of their age that are champions. They get to be able to share and bring on board their colleagues at that level. And then also the aspect of creating spaces where they can work individually with people with their fellow peers and try and talk about most of these issues and possibly bring out some of their own issues of concerns. Take, for instance, issues to do with mental health, issues to do with certain fears that might not necessarily be talked about open. So it's quite a very, very big significant difference that is observed for sure.
Thank you very much, Stephen, for that response and sharing of experience. Is there anyone else? So for now, let me discuss the presentation that I have prepared. So I'm going to share our work that we've been doing. We are engaging the traditional and religious leaders as gender equality champions. I think the picture that you see on my first slide there, it also relates to one of the events that we did toward the 16 days of GBV activism in Zimbabwe, where traditional leaders made a pledge to address GBV issues in their community. And that is part of the picture that you are seeing over there. So I'll start by, why do we need to engage these traditional and religious leaders? First, it's important to note that these groups of they are very powerful and very influential, and they influence behavior, and also because of their power, which is also mandated through maybe the church and also through the government, like in terms of the traditional leadership. And if you look at the faith leaders, you notice that in our communities, they are seen as role models, and they are seen as providers of spiritual guidance. And whatever usually the pastor or the faith leader says is usually accepted by the community as something which is coming from God. So they are very powerful, and if you look nowadays, you see, apart from the traditional churches, there are also the new emerging group of faith leaders who are young, and they have huge crowds which follow them. And so we notice that it is important also, based on their influence, to take them on board in addressing issues of GBV. And these are also role models. They are able then also to walk the talk in terms of the behavior change from the toxic masculinity to also to positive gender norm transformation. With the cultural issues within a community. So it's important for them then to have that in with understanding, and they fully some of the details, some of the practice that they are doing, and because they are seen as custodians of culture, they are then also able to identify some of the harmful practice that perpetuate gender inequalities, and the same also, they can also be a game changer in also addressing some of those gender inequalities. And mostly, if you find these leaders, they want to be seen as knowledge hubs. They want to be seen as someone with a pool of information. So by targeting them, we know that leaders across all boards, even apart from yourself, as the leader, and need to have a lot of with information able to play to their gallery, and this will enable them also to cascade this information to their communities of influence. So I'm going to share how we have been working with the traditional leadership in addressing issues of GBV and also sexual reproductive health and rights. So what is important is around the knowledge and skills building. I'm sure from your experience, you have already touched on this, that you need to build their experience, their skills. You need to build their knowledge around issues of toxic masculinities, issues of gender equality, so that they have that understanding on the negative impact of our gender inequality activity, but it's a journey where they need also to transform themselves first before also engaging their communities. So it's important then when you are doing the capacity building to understand that the leaders themselves, they need that self-transformation first, so that they will be able and confidently able to relay the information to their communities, and in a more confident manner. And it's important that also there's need also, when we are targeting these traditional leaders, there are also female traditional leaders, and also it's also important to bring them on board, so that we have this mixed discussion from the male and the female community leaders. And for Zimbabwe, what we have managed to do is we have managed to mobilize a group of traditional leaders from various communities, as well as also faith leaders from various denominations. It is important to touch this will enable also cross-learning and exchange of ideas from various also communities and also various faith background. This enable also peer learning, and also it inspires also our self change. And we have managed to do this through movement building, where we noted that we need to amplify the voice of the traditional leaders who speak positively, who act also in support of our gender inequality within the communities. So what we managed to do after building the capacity of these religious leaders, we then they then develop their action plans, where they said what are they going to do within their communities, with their churches, and then we also do exchange program with also other communities where there have been some positive change that have been happening in those communities. We also do dialogues and mentoring support, so that we also continue to sharpen their experience. And we have a program that we are working on in collaboration with Sonke, Gender Justice, and Mage from Sierra Leone, where we manage also to bring various leaders together for an exchange visit, which also allows also cross-learning from various communities, what have been working in other communities, and also what can also be replicated in some of these communities. And we have seen much progress on what these leaders have been doing in their communities. And most are now at the forefront in mobilizing their communities for change. In Zimbabwe, we have a policy around the marriage bill, where we have seen the traditional leaders that were part of our training, part of our movement for gender justice, have been at the forefront, also engaging with other traditional leaders, and also participate in petitioning the government around aligning the marriage laws, where there were lower age group for the girls, but it was high also for the boys. So the traditional leaders take a central role in also petitioning the government around aligning those laws so that there's that gender parity. Then also, this traditionally, because of their influence, they play a very pivotal role in ensuring state accountability to gender justice. And we have seen cases where which are maybe because of the long turnaround of cases around the GBV and at the police station. We have also leaders who have been at the forefront. We have one Chief Wange, who have been very supportive. He's a chief based in Zimbabwe. Has been very supportive in engaging the police to ensure that there's speed access to justice for the survivors of GBV. And he also support in terms of following up, and also because of challenges around access to vehicles for the police. He has also managed to offer support using his personal vehicle to ensure that the police also do their investigation to ensure that there is access to justice for the survivors. And the community leaders, they can also help to offer safer shelters for the survivors of GBV, and at community level, because of how the traditional leaders, they usually have this bigger space where they can also accommodate visitors and so forth. So we have seen also initiatives where survivors of GBV, because of shortage of safe shelters at community level, we have seen also traditional leaders coming in to also offer safer shelters to the communities. And also we have seen also in churches where there have been some revision of constitution to allow also female leadership within the church, which is something positive that we are experiencing. And when we did the training, we also managed to brought in female members from the church, some our pastors' wives, and also even other with roles within their church, so that they will be able also to articulate issues around women's rights, like access to HIV services, contraceptives, and so forth, which are some of the topical issues for women. So we have seen this, looking at this era of COVID, we have seen our leaders taking a very central role in terms of case monitoring. And in our communities, we have gender action teams that work closely with the traditional and faith leaders in also bringing to light some of the GBV cases. And also these leaders, they also provide space for the participation and also for education session, which are led by these community peer educators. So they create that enabling environment for the engagement of the communities, and also to drive the communities towards issues of GBV in our community. So this summarize my experience in working with our community leaders and how we have used them as champions of change in mobilizing for policy and as well as also issues of service delivery within our communities. Yeah, so thank you. That was my short presentation on what we've been doing with the traditional leaders. What are some of the successes that we have also recorded in the communities that we are working with? And so from now, there are any questions, issues of points of clarity that you need, you can either raise your hand or you can drop in the chat box.
Loud and clear, Lloyd. We all hear. Maybe just to add from Lloyd's presentation, because of the partnership that we have, both Sonke and SAfAIDS, through the Men Engage network. Also, the role in terms of bringing both traditional and faith leaders together to work together, because previously it's been we've been told that both traditional and faith leaders, they can't work together, but we realize that there's a big actually role that they can play together, and we have found that when they work together, they are able to share experience and to close all the gaps that maybe the COVID might take advantage. Because in most cases, if you work in silos, you'll find that people will capitalize to say, no, but it's not our culture. But if you allow them to work together, they're able to close all the gaps that it may want to capitalize on that. So that's one of the strengths that SAfAIDS is actually been doing, and I think so far that's working very well. And we see most of the traditional leaders and faith leaders now, they're not only just sitting there, giving instructions, but they are also participating, learning as well, and going and teach their communities as well. So that's a very good one, Lloyd. I'm proud of SAfAIDS and you guys.
Thank you very much, Vusi, for that. Yes. So as SAfAIDS, we have a model that we use, which is called the rock leadership. You can also see how, which is about building the capacity of the traditional and the religious leaders as champions. So I will drop in the link that you can also download that toolkit, which can also assist you as a referral point or some of the strategies of engaging with the traditional leaders in driving for gender justice as well as even the HIV response.
Okay, so Stephen is saying thanks very much for that, and thanks to Lloyd for the presentation. Come again, Lloyd?
Hello, are you speaking? Sorry.
Yes, I'm listening. You can come again. You wanted to say something?
Oh no, I thought you were speaking. Sorry.
Okay, no, I was actually reading from the chat box from Stephen. He's saying thank you very much for the presentation. But again, I think colleagues, I'm seeing that Lloyd has shared the link on the chat box. So you're more than welcome to click and get more information about the work that we do. I think, Lloyd, maybe in the absence of hands, maybe we might actually come up with the ideas in terms of moving forward, what colleagues might suggest, and if we have some faith leaders here, they might also contribute in terms of moving forward, because we really need to encourage the action steps moving forward to make sure that something is happening. It's not just a talk show, but it's something that we come up with the action plan. So I don't know if is there anything that maybe you want to add before we go to the action steps. All right.
Thank you very much. Yes, thank you. I think we can discuss maybe the action points going forward, maybe from a personal level. What are some of the issues that you are going to undertake? Maybe also as an organization, maybe if you are part of the traditional and faith leader, toxic masculinities within your community. Yeah.
Thanks very much, Lloyd. Colleagues, I will request that we just share some of things that you suggest in terms of moving forward? I'm not sure how many of faith leaders or traditional leaders are part of this workshop, but even if they are not, even if we don't have any, but I think whatever that we can contribute, it's for us. Whenever we meet with them, we are able to share with them to say these are the things that have been raised in the previous workshop. But if we have faith leaders, they might also share their experience in terms of moving forward. We really like to hear in terms of the action steps. What is it that you think we faith leaders and leaders they need to focus on? How can they do best to make sure that the issues of sexual reproductive health and rights are well attended, but also we are also able to eliminate the tendencies of toxic masculinities. So let's just come up with ideas that we would like to share in this room, and we might also share with the traditional leaders and faith leaders maybe who might not be around in this room. Any thoughts, things that we may do moving forward? What is that we can do? And even if maybe you can even give us some tips as organizations that are working with traditional leaders and faith leaders to say these are the things that you can do to engage the traditional leaders and faith leaders. Any thoughts? Any thoughts? Any addition? Things that you think we may do, because we really need to work with traditional leaders. We agree on that, but we really need to come up with things that need to be done. The strategies that we may share in working with them moving forward from here. I see a hand from Ellis.
It's actually Liana. I used Elise's link because she had to go to a meeting. I think moving forward, we should, in all the trainings, if we are going to do community trainings on toxic masculinity and gender balance topics, we should really try to include traditional leaders as much as possible, especially in the processes of the trainings, like preparing them with the facilitators on these trainings. And when we do these trainings in the communities, we know that community members really trust the words spoken by traditional leaders and pastors, church leaders. So if we include them in these trainings and then they can help facilitate these trainings, I think to bring the message across would be so much easier for the community also to accept. So just making them part of the whole process would be really a great idea.
Thanks very much. All the way from Namibia, thanks very much. We'd like to hear other opinions before we call it a day. I'm thinking how best we can close the gap between us and the traditional and faith leaders, because it seems as some of the topics that we touch, they are not much comfortable to tackle them. Now, how do we break that ice? How do we make them be comfortable to talk about these issues? And maybe at some point, that's why whenever maybe we invite them, at some point they are not actually willing to participate, because they know exactly that we'll be talking about sensitive issues that they're not really comfortable. What are the other steps that maybe we may come up? And I know the language training, they're not actually comfortable to be trained, but they believe to be capacitated, because they're the traditional leaders and faith leaders. So any thoughts in terms of bridging the gap between us and them? Because at the end of the day, we really need each other. What are the other possible steps that we can do to bridge the gap? Stephen?
For me, I think one thing that probably I think we could also try and work on, in addition to the ideas that have been shared, is to try and ensure we create an environment, for lack of a better term, I'd call it a safe space, where you gather traditional leaders from different religious backgrounds, and then just take them through a process, I think possibly to highlight issues to do with value clarifications, And then that, I think, gives us an opportunity to have a buy-in from them, where when they go through this process, they get to have an understanding. And yes, one of the biggest challenges is really the language and how they would talk about certain aspects. But when we give it to them from a point of view of what has been their experience, what has growing up been all about, like the examples that were shared earlier on during the discussions of how masculinity affects an individual, the different aspects of maybe what toys do you get for a child, a boy, a girl, what is expected of a man, and the whole gender box, just to give them an understanding, and then now to try and say, okay, out of what we're talking about, what role can you play? And then we kind of create what I would call a cascading system, where from from themselves, then they now start to take it down to the individual communities or to the individual religious groups to try and help them be able to share that particular information, taking into account the different ideas that have already been shared by the colleagues earlier.
Thanks very much, Stephen. I think I fully agree with you. The approach is very important. I think Tola is also sharing sentiments to say, very true, Stephen. Non-judgmental space, not easy when some ideas are so damaging and so entrenched. That is true. I mean, I can imagine if first time as a faith leader or traditional leader, you come and want to talk about termination of pregnancy, So I think we as civil organization, we also need to find a ways in terms of how do we package our messages, because it's not about the language, it's about end of the day achieving our goal, because end of the day we want to ensure that everyone can access health facilities easily and freely, but at the same time the issues of gender-based violence are tackled. Now, if you come to them and you come with these tough words to them, it becomes a problem. But again, the issues of approach, how to approach them is very important, because if you come to them with the judgmental attitude, the resistance just comes in and it becomes difficult to work with them. Any ideas, colleagues, before we call a day? Any thoughts in terms of working with traditional leaders and faith leaders? Our aim was to engage them in this workshop. We thought that maybe they'll be coming as well to participate so that they can share their experiences and also their ideas. But in their absence, we can also look at other possible strategies that we can bring them on board. Unfortunately, I will say the chief, the kings, they've actually established an association that is called COTLA. It's a cultural association that works with traditional leaders. Recently, we had a lovely workshop with them. They were participating. It was very fruitful. Willard, you may come in.
All right, thank you. Was just thinking through, I think, in the conversation on also how best we would want to engage young people themselves, so that I think they are part of the process of trying to engage with the tradition as well as the faith leaders in a way that I think by the end of the day we create an environment where they're able to talk to each other back and forth without necessarily, I think, waiting for the older generation to engage with the traditional leaders and the faith-based leaders, but allowing the young people themselves, I think, to also own the platform where they're able to come in and then engage. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Willard. Yeah, that's a good idea. And I think the other plus for right now, we have even young traditional leaders recently who have been actually I would say appointed, if I may use that word, and they are so very much energetic, and they are open-minded. They are willing to engage on these issues. We go to other countries, we find young prince, young princess, and fortunately, we also have queens as well who are very much influential. So if we bridge that gap and try to talk to them and also make sure that it's safe for them to talk without being judged, I think it's one of the strategies that we can apply. Thanks very much, Willard, for sharing. I see on the chat box, Stephen Angwa, or you agree with Stephen for 100%. I don't know, Lloyd, if there's anything maybe we can actually wrap up.
Thanks. I want to bring another issue. Sorry for that, but yeah, I've seen engaging young faith leaders. We have seen maybe based on Zimbabwe, maybe it's a different experience out there, but I've seen a high number of young faith leaders who are coming on board, and they do a lot of miracles and so forth. But the challenge is around engaging them. They have not been very much forthcoming as we do with the older generation of faith leaders. I'm not sure, maybe from your experience, if you have also encountered something similar, if there are maybe strategies that we have used, maybe you can also share, because we have tried in Zimbabwe. They are not that easily forthcoming to work with. They just disappear when you need them most.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's not an easy thing, and I agree that these issues they are so deep in a way that whenever you try to address them, people they become uncomfortable. But that does not actually discourage us to push the struggle. Like Chola said earlier on, that these issues they are so deep entrenched, in a way that if someone talk about them, it becomes uncomfortable. But I think we need to soldier on, and those young leaders, the few that we have, we can work with them, and those queens, because they are queens who are very influential, they are princes who are very influential. We also need to work with them and bring this topic on the table so that we are able to achieve our goal. We need to be smart, but at the same time, I'm tempted to say let us be patient, but I'm not sure for how long, because I'm worried about those who are oppressed. If I say be patient, it's not easy to be patient when you are oppressed. But at the same time, reality says it's a process, and but if we come together, sharing ideas, I think we'll be able to reach that goal. So I will read the last comment from the chat box. It's from Chola. It's an identity issue again, as Stephen said. It's about value. So yeah, it's about value clarification. So many have identities tied up in their male privilege gender roles. That is true. That is true. And Chola, I always say that I've never been in power, maybe from politically, but I can imagine how difficult it is for a someone who's been enjoying the privileges, the power, to surrender that power. But again, if some of these people who have enjoyed the power, they are willing to surrender that means those few who are saying it's not right to hang on to their power, you need to share. We can actually capacitate them and create a safer space for them to be on our side, so that we can be able to find strategies in terms of how to engage their counterparts, because there are quite a few leaders who are willing to say, yes, we are very much aware that women are oppressed, but the question is, do we create a safer space for them to come in us and work with us and share ideas in terms of how to engage their counterparts? So yeah, thanks very much. And the power is not just conferred to those officially in office, whether political or religious. There are power dynamics in between. That's true. Thanks very much, Chola. Thanks very much. That's true. I agree with you. Yeah, colleagues, without wasting any time, I think, Lloyd, any closing remarks? Because I think we don't have any hands now. So shall we close this and maybe just give. Okay, I see that there were comments from Zoma. I think I missed that. Oh, thanks very much, Tola, for raising that. Zoma, I'm very sorry. I nearly missed that chat. at Lloyd, the more awareness is created and they are sensitized, the more young faith leaders will come on board. We shouldn't give up. If 2 or 3 agree to work, let's work with them. I agree, Ozola, it's very important that we don't actually give up now. Those few that are on board, let's work with them. Let us not wait for the big number. There was a campaign that we used to share that was called One Man Can. The One Man Can was saying, the one who's there, who's willing to make a change, let's work with that one. And that one will be able to go out and reach more and influence others as well. So those few are on Lloyd, let's work with them. So thanks very much, colleagues. Let me give Lloyd to give us closing remarks and call it a day.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Vusi, for co-facilitating with me on this session. And I really want to thank the participants who have been very active in the space. And it has been an insightful discussion that we did. And I understand we've also managed to get something from this conversation. For me, I got a lot of insight on how we can further this work, this movement, or around gender justice, working with the traditional as well as the faith leaders as champions for change. I know it's it's a process that we need also to understand that there are ups and downs in the engagement that we are going to do with the community leaders. But once we have that shared understanding with the leaders, it also helps to unlock some of the gaps within the communities that can also help to support issues around policy, issues around access to services for addressing issues of GBV and also issues of women's rights, access to HIV prevention tools such as ARVs and so forth. So it's important to bring these leaders on board because of their influence and also the position that they wield within the community. So with this few remarks, I thank you very much for your participation, and thanks Vusi for supporting this session. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Lloyd. Thanks very much, colleagues, for your time. I know it's end of the day, you're exhausted, but you managed to stay with us. Thank you very much. God bless you.